My name's Dana Harris Seeger. Welcome to my studio at Visual Philosophy. Today I want to talk about painting realistically. So here on this large encaustic painting, I am using oil paint and oil pastel to replicate this ethnic Latvian belt onto the painting. And the reason I'm using oil-based products, oil paint and oil pastel, is because oil is compatible and will stick to the encaustic. If I try to use something like acrylic or watercolor, it's just going to bead up and it won't stick. So I'm using oil paint, and I've got a base here of color because it's pretty difficult to actually paint on the encaustic surface. It's very smooth and slick, and even though it won't bead up, it will stick eventually. You can see that it's dry. It's dried from the base layer, but it's really hard to get the oil pastel and the oil paint to have any substance when you're painting on just the encaustic surface. So I've laid down a base of oil paint that has dried, and I used a drying medium called Galkid, and that helps the oil paint dry faster because I didn't want to wait around for a week or so while it dried before I started to put on my top layer. So when we're talking about painting realistically, I like this method particularly for paintings like this because there's a lot of etherealness to the painting and to the encaustic. I've got some screen prints that are more graphic. I've got a lot of just abstract shapes and soft colors, and having something that's more realistic really helps it to stand out. So that's what I'm working on with some of these paintings. It almost looks like it's just draped there or kind of collaged on, which is the idea. And the way that I started is I actually laid this flat, I put the belt on it, and then I just traced around the shape that I had made with the belt. So it's actually pretty close to life size. It's a little bit bigger. You can see the pattern is a little bit bigger. But the idea is to make it look pretty realistic. So when I'm painting realistically, the main goal is to try to make it look like what I'm painting, obviously. And the way that I do that, some tips are to always refer back to the object, what you're painting, more than, or just as often, let's say, as the rendition, the painting. So every time I make a mark, I look back and make sure that that is correct on my object. And that way I know that I'm doing it right, and I'm not just thinking I'm doing it right, but I'm actually observing and looking at the piece that I'm drawing or painting. And it's really nice to have it right next to it. Sometimes if you're doing a landscape, for instance, you're looking off into the distance, it can be hard to look up and down, but the more you practice, the better you'll get at doing that, looking and then translating into 3 dimensions. But the trick is to try not to let your brain take over and paint what you think it is. I observe this and I think I know what it is, so I can put that away and then paint. No, you have to keep observing and looking at what you're actually trying to replicate. So I'll just start. I've already started, obviously, but I'll do a little bit more, and you can see how I start to get the illusion of the belt in oil paint. All right, here we go. I've zoomed in so you can see a little bit closer what I'm doing. I've got my paint brushes. These are actually watercolor brushes, but I like them for oil paint for this purpose because they can get pretty small and softer marks. I've got some oil pastels. I have Sennelier, Pentel, Crayons, Holbein. I use a variety the Sennelier is the softest. I really like that kind. The best for like just the smushiness. And then several types of oil paint, Winsor Newton, Grumbaker, and here is my Galkid medium for drying. Let's see if yesterday, yeah, let's see, it's already dry, so add some more. Do that. And then I can mix that into my paint. I've got some white. The nice thing is the oil paint doesn't, if you don't mix it with the Galkid, it doesn't dry for a pretty long time. So I'm getting a nice sort of soft tannish color that I can use for the sort of shadowy parts of the texture on the belt. And looking at the belt, there's these sort of cross weaving patterns, but I can't do it exactly. I'm not going to try to match it exactly as it is. What I am going to try to do though is allude to it. So I'm just going to make little sort of hashy textures. That way it kind of looks like the weaving and you get a little bit of that shadow illusion. And the reason I like the dryer is because this is already pretty dry and I just painted that yesterday. Normally oil paint just out of the tube takes a lot longer. And some people like to mix wet and wet, meaning if it's still wet, you can blend it together. But because these are so delineated and I have such a structure, I don't really want to do that. I really want to keep it separate. Let's see, I had some purple over here too. Oh. There we go. Trying to make a nice purplish color for over here for the kind of shadows. So what I'm looking at is the direction that the shadows are taking on the weaving and trying to replicate that with the paint. And you don't have to get super duper detailed. It's just the illusion. So sometimes less is more. And if you go too detailed, then your eye sort of picks it out as fake. That's good. Some of that purple. And then for the highlights, where the light's shining on the little, I can use either oil pastel as a little highlight because it's a consistent size and it blends nicely with the oil paint and just gives the littlest hint of a highlight. I like that a lot. Also, the nice thing about painting versus using a photograph or something is that I can really choose what color and how I want to replicate it. So even if it's a little bit pinker, if I wanted to match more of the peachy colors here, then I'm going to use more of the sort of orangey brown tones rather than purples, because if it's not important to the symbolism and the meaning, then you're the artist and you can decide how you want to make it. So that, I hope, gives you a little bit of an idea of how that process works. I'll start down here again with, Let's put some of this in. Darker parts. I also built up a little of the texture. I like the brush stroke texture on this with the oil paint underlayer because it mimics kind of that woven pattern. So I really like that. I think that worked out really well. I am thinking about the shadows too and which direction. Again, looking at what I'm painting, there's the shadows on the underside because the light's coming from above. So even these tiny little nubbins of weaving have that depth. And so I don't want to do the shadows all over the place. I want to do it on the top, but I want to do it down here where it kind of sinks down in. That makes sense. So just continuing to look back as much as you look at what you're painting, and I see that this color that I chose originally is a little too green. So what I'm going to do is add a little blue. Yeah, that'll make it a little bit nicer. Or is that too blue? Ah, the beauty and curse of oil painting. Color. Do I like it? Does it work? Am I okay with it not looking exactly like it? Does it flow? I think so. And sometimes it's hard because I'm mixing up little batches of color here, so I don't have, you know, big areas of color that I can just draw from. I'm not using it straight out of the tube, so I really have to be careful about mixing and matching if I'm trying to be consistent throughout and make it look, you know, like it's part of the whole thing, part of one thing. That's nice. So I'll start doing a little bit down there. It might help too to draw out the shapes just really lightly. That's why I also like using the oil pastel. The Pentel isn't as greasy and smushy, so it actually draws pretty nicely if you want to do like underdrawing. Sometimes I feel like that just takes too long, and because I have this whole entire thing to do, I'll just wing it, but you know, if you're really concerned about it, then doing a little underdrawing could really help. I love these stumps for either smearing or kind of wiping away. You can always paint over that. So that didn't quite line up. So I'm going to have to... On Encaustic, it's really easy to wipe, but on oil paint, you kind of have to get some either linseed oil or mineral spirits on your rag to make sure that you're going to actually wipe it off. This one should go down like that. There we go. And it's kind of twisting, so it's a little bit of an illusion that I might have to switch from doing this vertically to doing it horizontally. Although I did take pictures of it when it was laying down, which really helps. I feel like I like doing glazing, doing underpaintings, because it's a lot easier to kind of get detail as you build up rather than trying to get all the detail in one go. It's pretty easy to just wipe off that oil paint smudge. So I'm just doing a solid, even though it's not solid, but I'm going to go back just like I did here when it's dry and glaze over it. It also helps it to go a little quicker because I'm kind of assembly lining, so I can continue to do the red all the way down, kind of like I did that blue, and it stays consistent. And then when it dries, I'll just switch colors and keep going. So that's a little bit about my process creating realistic renderings in oil paint, oil pastel, on large encaustics. Hope that gives you some tips on how to do that yourself.